Rome, late summer, a year when Senate scrolls stained with oil and ink seemed heavier than usual. The air smelled of hot asphalt, frying olives, and smoke from lamps. It tasted faintly of iron. In a townhouse behind a columned portico, a sound cut the dinner talk like a thrown cup shattering on tile. The sound was not the ordinary complaint of servants or the clatter of dishes. It was a sharp, human punctuation. Her name was Livia Marcellina, patrician wife, hostess of a small household, and a larger set of expectations. Her wrists were bound not with hemp, but with straps worked to a frame. Leather bit the skin, polished wood pressed a joint. The object at the center of the room was practical looking. It was carved by a craftsman with neat hands, but its intention was explicit: to correct, to instruct, to ensure silence. They called it an apparatus for discipline. It had a name later given in whispers and then in jest. Tonight it was simply a piece of furniture and a sentence. Livia had not been accused of crime. She had spoken too loudly in a house that preferred echoes. The servants stood frozen, faces wet with lamp glow and terror. A carpenter named Lucius, sweating with the heat of the courtyard oven on his neck, tightened a bolt with fingers that still smelled of sawdust. Marcus Valerius, her husband, sat with fabric of dignity, his voice small next to the clink of metal. He said, "We are preserving reputation," she said. "You are preserving fear." The room inhaled. In the small flash before the leather closed, Livia smiled. Not in defeat, not in madness, a narrow, private defiance. That smile was the first crack in the polish of obedience, and it would echo farther than the household imagined. Keep your sentences short at the first strike, then let long, patient description unspool. Alternate the sharp with the slow. Promise a revelation. How a device born to humiliate became entertainment for a city. They brought the device out from a workshop beneath the basilica. It was a clever construction, a seat with an iron ring, a set of tightening screws, a set of leather straps that could fix posture and vocal cords indirectly by force. The planner of its lines and angles was a man named Ducis Pahan, a maker of agricultural tools turned inventor of order. Servants described the mechanism as clinical, an aesthetic of efficiency. Senators called it decorum. In the small room, the dialogue between those who ordered and those who obeyed unfurled like a manuscript being read aloud. Marcus said, "Livia, this will teach youth home." Livia answered, "This will teach you to be smaller." Lucius muttered, "It is only for the stubborn." Alia, her chief maid, whispered, "My hands tremble." Flavia. Another servant tried to steady the straps and said, "Forgive me." Marcus insisted, "You will accept this for the house," Livia spat. "You will accept this because you are afraid of what I might say." Lucius paused. "We follow orders, my lady." Alia hesitated. "But is this law?" Marcus lied softly. "This is our law." Livia's jaw worked. "Then let it be on record," she said. The straps tightened. The screws sang a cold note. The room filled with tastes and textures, the sap of oak, the sour of sweat, the metallic nearsent when iron meets skin. The velvet hush of fabric pulled taut, the sudden small sound of a breath restricted. Pain arrived as a precise instrument, not chaotic. Pressure at the joints, a ring of warm blood under leather, the sting of compressed lungs. This was private violence administered on, a domestic theater, dressed as correction and named as necessity. The servants' reactions, Aelius's hands clammy, Flavia's eyes wide, Lucius's knuckled whiteness, were recorded later in letters and in the margin of a steward's ledger. The device did what it had been made to do. It taught silence. She recovered slowly. In the days after the first evening, Livia wrote in secret on scraps borrowed from a schoolboy named Publius, who traded Latin grammar for bread. Her body bore the marks off device, and the town bore the rumor. Ducis, proud of his engineering, displayed a sketch in the Guildhall. Titus Sinus, a neighbor with a taste for novelty, saw the sketch and laughed. "We should show this at the festival." The idea traveled the way small ideas do in a crowded city, whispered in baths. Thrown like orange rinds among the benches in the theater, repeated with the sort of salacious pleasure that makes scandal into spectacle. In a small paragraph at first, then in letters, and then in jokes, the idea of the apparatus shifted from private discipline to public demonstration. Stories of wives corrected for speaking loudly became part of weekday gossip and weekend satire. The inventor Drews attended salons where clergy and counselors sipped wine and debated modesty. Ducis explained torque and leather, while Senator Gass, who liked order most of all, nodded and said, "If it creates stability, let it be known." At a banquet where perfumed oil slid like silk across marble, a young rhetoric named Decima mimed the tightening of screws, and the hall exploded with laughter. The mechanism was refined, straps rearranged for easier display, the ring polished for shine, until it was no longer only an implement of obedience. It was becoming an object of parade. These were not isolated changes. They were the slow turning of taste and steam of baths and candlelight of libraries. The idea of using discipline as demonstration took root. The backstory is not a single paragraph. It is childhoods and apprenticeships, losses, and choices. Livia had been a girl who listened to her father teach rhetoric and learned to answer with care. She trained her voice in songs in the courtyard where her mother taught her to sew social graces into sentences. As a young woman, she read maps of law books and married Marcus partly for alliance, partly because alliances felt safer than unpredictability. After the marriage, a miscarriage took away a child they barely named. That loss tilted Livia inward, made her questions sharper. In a third paragraph, Ducis had learned metal. Work beside a river, watching axles spin logs. Tillich soared into invention when he saw that tightening a joint changed motion. Marcus once saved a ledger from a fire and told himself that order was all that kept the city standing. These trajectories intersected at a dinner table where a smile could be construed as challenge. The first public appearance came at a private banquet that a wealthy patron used to demonstrate taste. The hall was lit with braziers that made halos on plaster. Tables smelled of cumin and lamb. The sound of wine being poured was steady, a low river. Ducis had arrived with a fitted crate and an air of competence. Marcus sat like a man who expected applause. At the center of the room, the device was placed on a raised dais and rubbed to shine. The crowd circled. Lucius, there to answer questions. Titus to joke. Disma to narrate. Senator Gass to observe. The assemblage registered the device in 5 senses. The glitter on metal. The smell of polished leather. The scrape of wood on the platform, the whoosh. When someone cleared their throat. The sudden taste of metallic temps in the mouth when laughter compressed. Livia stood before them, shoulders straight in a way that belied the bruise on her side. She was called to demonstrate. The exchange was long and charged with small battles of voice and authority. Ducis said, "Observe its balance." Marcus added, "It preserves harmony," Lucius uneasy said. "It is simple engineering," Decima teased. "An efficient entertainment," Gass offered. "Order is an art," Livia replied. "Who order? Whose art?" Ducis insisted. "This is for correction, not cruelty," Livia countered. "Correction made spectacle poisons the meaning of law." Marcus interceded. "Lady, sit and learn," Livia asked. "Must learning always be a public lesson?" The crowd murmured. Then someone in the back shouted, "For a demonstration." Livia felt the straps again, the ring cold beneath her hip. The screws turned for show. She kept her face like a mask. During the procedure, to the surprise of many, she murmured a line of bitter humor. The hall laughed first, at the novelty, and then at itself. Her smile returned thin and precise, and it caused a ripple that was both discomfort and delight. That ripple would widen, pause. If this unsettles you, you are not alone. If this tightened your chest, say so in the comments. Tell us in one line beginning with, "I would call it." Give the device a name that captures what it does to memory and voice. Start your sentence with, "I would call it," so others can read and respond easily. We read every comment because these names matter. They are ways of understanding power. Does your name lean toward mockery? Toward legalism? Toward empathy? Say it. If you prefer, use a single word. If you have a historical example in mind, mention it briefly. Your responses help us see how this story lands today. Now we return to the hall where laughter and unease braided together into a new custom. The device moved from banquets into smaller arenas, where the poorer classes watched spectacle for fewer coins. Marcus arranged a public demonstration at a market square. A man named Publius, who sold garlands, recorded the event in a crude sketch and sold prints. A baker, Claudia, hung a note in her window mocking the device. A young boy named Gas Miner mimed the tightening for his friends and was punished for mocking a man of rank. The crowd's senses were overloaded, the dust of the square choking with spice scents. The clang of a brass rim, the stinging sunlight like a slow burn on exposed skin, the chatter like a river of pebbles, the bitter aftertaste in mouths that had chewed stale bread. People began to bet on how long someone would endure the fixture. They made drinking games out of restraint. The device acquired a second life, not as enforcement, but as amusement. Names floated in the chorus. Marcus enjoying the performance from the platform. Drusus beaming as crowds admired his work. Lucius refusing to meet eyes with those who laughed. A man named Cease, a minor magistrate, wrote a note to Marcus, warning that custom could become contagious. But contagion was what it needed to survive. The poor found in the spectacle both mirth and a mirror. Mirth because cruelty made the powerful seem smaller. Mirror because the city saw its own appetite. The transfer from domestic punishment to public entertainment happened in small steps and in big laughs. And those steps were aided by song and by the marketplace. The larger public demonstration that followed became a trial of narratives. The magistrate is conveyed when images of the device appeared in illustrations that mocked prominent families. A formal hearing was arranged in the basilica. Gas presided, wearing the robe of one who weighs precedent. The apparatus was placed on a dais polished to a near-blind glare. Accusers and defenders lined up. Livia was called to speak, not as a defendant, but as a witness to experience. This was the moment where private hurt confronted public theater. The dialogue in the hall was extended and seismic. Gas asked, "Do you deny the device has order?" Drusus replied, "No." Magistrate, prosecutor, Marcus Lucullus, said, "It has become a spectacle of humiliation." Drusus answered, "Spectacle can teach." Livy rose and said, "A lesson that is laughter is a lesson lost." Marcus interjected, "It is for stability." Decima, who had become a public rhetoric, asked Drusus, "Did you ever intend for it to be used for sport?" Drusus, red-faced, said, "I intend a direction." Lucius spoke, voice low, "I intended my hands to make things right." A clerk named Claudia read testimony from Aelia, who described the first night with tremor in her recall. Flavia's statement came in a clear, small voice. "We were trained to obey, not to invent cruelty." The guards shifted. The gallery breathed. Tension pulled tight like a boring. Livia then described how the device felt to speak through a throat bent by straps, how voice became commodity, how laughter from others shallowed the pain. She concluded with a line that made the magistrate pause. "They turned my question into public sport to teach us to fear asking." The hall held that silence like a cup. The magistrate declared that while the apparatus had technical uses, its public employment must be curtailed. Some called it a victory. Others, particularly those who profited from spectacle, called it inconvenient. There were 3 moments of acute tension that decided how the story moved forward. First, the night in Thedone House when Livia first refused to be small. Her smile there was not a comic detail, but a fracture. Pain described in tactile terms, leather pressing warm, the ring cold, a breath cut short, made the private real. Second, the banquet demonstration where laughter and horror chased each other in the hall. The device gleamed, and her wit cut the gleam into shadow. Third, the marketplace show where the poor made sport out of cruelty, a reversal that made cruelty a currency and thus harder to control. The smell of sweat, the shrieks of boys betting small coins, the metallic taste of blood, and the collective cheer. Each of these moments carried weight in the city. A household secret turned into a public ritual. An inventor's ambiguous pride became civic shame. Amusement became custom. Each moment stretched into 2 or 3 paragraphs of memory and reaction, describing faces, hands, the scraping of wood, teeth against wine, and the slow, insidious way normalized an object. In one of these scenes, Titus tried to intervene and was laughed out of the circle. In another, Decimus' satire rippled across scrolls and taverns. The tension resolved not with a single verdict, but with a dampening of spectacle and the scattering of names into rumor. After the formal hearing, there were immediate attempts to erase the story or to rename it. Some official recorders tried to label the device with a clinical term, apparatus corens. Others in taverns called it the laughter seat. Sculptors carved small reliefs of a smiling woman at a table as if to domesticate the image. Aelianus, a minor poet, wrote a couplet that became popular. Order wed to timber, laughter wed to shame. There was a scramble among elites to recover dignity, to rename the device as medicine rather than mockery. They commissioned inscriptions that emphasized intention and minimized consequence. Artists like Decima painted the device with ironic ribbons. A memorial was proposed by Marcus to mark the house of the family as one of restraint. But the people remembered differently. Publius' crew, sketchy circulated, and children painted them on doorways and charcoal, adding grins to the faces. Within a month, the tale of Livia transformed into multiple versions. Some said she fled and lived in a remote villa. Others insisted she led a secret circle of women who cataloged abuses. A few made her into legend, a woman who laughed while chained, and somehow turned her laughter into a tune that sailors sang. Sculptures and graffiti disagreed. The attempt to sanitize the object failed because memory is porous. It leaks humor and resentment, and both make for stronger stories than careful records. 1 month after the hearing, Livia's name had already become a shorter thand. In taverns, when a man scolded a wife for speaking too freely, someone would mutter to Livia with you, and the jibe would land like a pebble. The magistrate's ruling had curtailed official displays, but not private adaptation. Mothers taught daughters to lower their eyes. Some taught them to smile in ways that concealed questions. Duces continued to receive commissions for corrective furniture from provincial houses. Marcus published a treatise on household harmony that was polite and precise. It attempted to reframe what had occurred as necessary, referring to balance and custom. Livia, meanwhile, kept writing in small ciphered notes, passing them to Aelia, who hid them in looms. Songs emerged in the docks, where sailors rewrote the tale as a comedy of errors. Children used drawings of the device as toys. Memory began its slow work of calcification. Some parts oify into law, others dissolve into rumor. The object's name shifted in the vernacular. The people called it names that mixed contempt and amusement. 3 months later, the device had become part of ritual satire. Street performers used a mock-up to stage caricatures of patricians. Decimus' plays included a chorus that mimicked tightening screws as a metrical beat. The moralizing treatises argued in print and in lectures. Scholars debated whether laughter at pain was a sociotolymian response or a symptom of decay. The device turned up as a metaphor in sermons about obedience and in recipes for remedies against arrogance. In provincial towns, local magistrates adapted versions for discipline of disorder, which meant in practice that the lower classes were at risk of spectacle once again. The elites tried to contain the symbol by embedding legal language that forbade public displays, but enforcement was uneven. In poems, Livia's ambiguous smile was either a symbol of resistance or a mark of moodness. People wrote epics, some noble, some cruel. A new archives was forming in scraps of paper, in the memories of servants, in the margins of municipal records. The debate spread. Was the apparatus an instrument or an idea? 6 months on, the tale had calmed in some circles and grown in others. The magistrate's ruling had been enforced sporadically, and several public shows were shut down. Yet, the private use of similar devices persisted in houses where reputation required demonstration. Aelones. Couplet was taught to apprentices, and misced in taverns. Livia's letters, a few surviving fragments, were recopied and circulated by sympathizers. Her voice in those fragments was steady and cautious and full of the exacting curiosity that had once been deemed excessive. In towns far from Rome, the device had acquired regional variations and new names, some mocking, some clinical. The object had moved from being a tool of intimate discipline to an archetype in the civic imagination. That archetype taught Allison about how upright institutions become spectacles when they need applause. What to do now in our time? We find these threads in manuscripts, in the graffiti of bakeries, in fragments of songs. To remember is to choose what to pass on. If this story matters, subscribe to follow more histories of objects that taught cities how to behave. Comment with a name for the device, and with your memory of a modern object that crossed from private shame into public entertainment. Because memory is not neutral. It chooses sides, preserves a grin, records a scream, and sometimes, if we are fortunate, lets laughter become resistance. Because ideas do not bend and laughter can cut through stone. Laughter can cut through stone.